Hi everybody, it's Joe Chaffee. It's a Thursday night on the 18th of October 2018, and it's just a little bit past 5 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock. I just want to start right off. Let me apologize. Yesterday, with respect to the library live streaming, one of the things that I discovered yesterday was the fact that it's hard for me to do 5 things at once. And I can't do the library presentation and pay attention to the chat board at the same time and switch a show on the air at the same time and keep my thoughts and my train of thought together. So it's going to be very difficult for me to be able to entertain questions given those circumstances. I think maybe at some point I'm going to have somebody help me with this. With respect to some of the chat questions, if I want to bring them on the screen. But if you've got any questions from yesterday, just send them to me. If you're on the Patreon platform, just send me the questions that way, and I'll answer them. Again, maybe next time, if I can have if I have someone with me, if a friend of mine is with me and he can handle the chat side, maybe we can get some of the questions in. So we've got quite a bit going on, of course, with this cold air. There's not a whole lot of weather going on at the moment around the country with respect to watches and warnings. This is usually a pretty quiet time of month. So you do get the atmosphere to kind of rev down a bit. Michael, of course, back a little less than 10 days ago, was front and center, but that just pretty much zapped everything out of the atmosphere, I guess. And now we were in what I would think is typical October mode, except for the fact that the weather pattern is on the chilly side in the eastern part of the United States, and that's not going to change. We also, of course, a number of you have already spoken about it. There's chatter with regards to late next week, and weather models continuing to show the possibility of some kind of storminess in the eastern part of the United States, though how that evolves still remains a big question, and we're going to talk about that going forward tonight, because this is, in a lot of ways, it's practice for what we go through during the winter months and into the early spring, and that is watching these models in the long range where they've got everything all over the place, and then kind of see what's going on, get a feel for what's actually happening in the atmosphere, and then zero in on what we think is going to ultimately be the outcome. And we've got a long way to go, but it's the middle of October, and we're getting like I said, some early practice with respect to what lies ahead in the wintertime. We'll do a little, let me do a little quick business here. Let me bring up the Patreon platform for those of you who want additional weather coverage and enjoy all of this. You can subscribe to my platform on Patreon, which includes exclusive posts just for Patreon members. You can message me, and you don't have to wait for the live stream to do it. You can message me anytime during the day. Plus, you're with a lot of other people that are on the same planet as you are, where they are interested in weather and looking forward and looking ahead and looking behind as far as the weather is concerned. So if you are interested, take a look at it. There are some posts up there that are free. The base subscription is about $2 a month. There are some higher tiers, especially for those of you who want a little extra hand-holding or just feeling a little bit more generous. And I appreciate those of you that have signed up and have considered it. Thank you very much. Ryan Ford was at my talk last night, and he's on tonight. Budding young weather person of the future. It was a real pleasure to meet you and your dad. And if you want me, by the way, to come out to your local library, if you're in the in the New York City, Long Island, Hudson Valley, Western Connecticut, and in New Jersey, Central and North Jersey. South Jersey's a little bit of a trip for me, but Central and North Jersey, that could be done. Let your local library know that I'm available and have them get in touch with me, and we'll see if we can put a couple of dates together. I am actually working on perhaps 2 more library appearances in New Jersey in the coming months. We'll see what the final results of that are. So let's take a look at what's happening tonight. And as I said, the weather across the U.S. is relatively quiet. When we look at the watches and warnings map, there really isn't very much. In terms of precipitable weather or precipitation, we're looking at the flood watch, flash flood watches that continue for parts of central Texas, and of course we know many areas in Texas, in eastern and in eastern and central Texas, have been hit very hard in the last week with respect to heavy rains. It has thinned out somewhat, but it's still an issue, and there may be some more rain coming in the days ahead. The only other issues are with respect to frosts and freezes, and that is covering parts of the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Atlantic states and on up through southern areas of the Northeast. Now, just bear in mind that frost advisories, freeze warnings, they only go up once for a particular area. Once those areas have achieved their first frost and first freezes, the growing season is over, and then you don't see those warnings anymore. So it's not an indication of how cold it is, because areas around the Great Lakes and interior areas of the Northeast, a lot of these areas, and back, of course, up through a lot of the plains, have already had their first frosts and freezes. So you're not going to see frost and freeze warnings in those areas anymore, because nothing's growing anymore. Okay, as far as the severe weather is concerned, that too has calmed down, obviously. And in fact, the area of thunderstorms tonight is fairly minimal. Only in a small portion of northern Florida, a small portion along the Texas coast, and in parts of West Texas, and also a small area in western Colorado and about half of the state of Utah. So the amount of thunderstorm activity now diminishes considerably, and you probably won't see too much from day to day, except for when you have storm systems that are going to be in play. With regards to what's happening tonight, satellite-wise, really isn't a whole lot. Again, only in the areas down in the southern plains and back through Texas and in the Gulf State, in the western Gulf Coast, where we've got this sort of solid overcast. But if you look across much of the rest of the U.S., excuse me, it is really nice. It's dry and it's clear. We had a really beautiful day skywise in my neck of the woods today, even though temperatures struggled all day. And now we're going into clear skies and light winds for the overnight. And I think we can actually, we'll start it off. It's going to be a little hard to see the temperatures on this at first. But we do have, I can show you at least close up in terms of some of the numbers that we're seeing this evening. Of course, these are temperatures as of 7:13 Eastern Time. So if you're watching this on the replay, it's likely that these numbers are going to be a lot lower at that point. So we're looking at 30s already across a lot of New York State and interior New England, where you see the purple areas. We're talking about the freeze warnings. The light blue is the frost advisories, and they extend down into Virginia, West Virginia, and you can see with the areas with the freeze warnings. I'm going to take off the hazards so that at least we can now look at the actual, we'll look at the temperatures by themselves. And well, even here they're not showing up that well, but you can see the numbers here. One of the big key to the frost situation, by the way, is the fact of waiting for those darn winds to drop off, because it has been breezy here all day, and going into this evening we were still seeing winds running at about 10 to 20 miles an hour with some higher gusts. But oftentimes after sunset, as a high builds in and the gradient relaxes, those winds can drop off in a big hurry. So I've already seen some places up in the northwestern counties of New Jersey, northeastern Pennsylvania, already down in the mid-30s. So I think those winds will drop, and a lot of the areas that are under the frost advisory will probably get their frost, and a lot of the places that are in the freeze area, the freeze warning area, are going to get their freezes. So get your plants inside. Get your plants inside, because if this frost doesn't get you, or this freeze, the next one will anyway. So you might as well just get it out of the way and get it done. All right. why don't we look forward to where we're going? And again, we have something in the long term. There's not really too much that's going to be happening between now and the end of next week. So we've got a lot of time to watch all this, okay? This is not something that is just going to surprise us or just suddenly be there and pop up at the last minute. We've got a long time to watch what's going to occur and evolve. So this high moves out. Then we've got another cold front coming through. Now, there's some of that moisture that's down through Texas and in the western Gulf that gets pulled eastward Friday night into Saturday morning, some showers. I don't really particularly think this is a big deal rain-wise in terms of actual precipitation amounts. Then the cold front moves on through, and here comes that next shot of cold air. And during the early morning hours of Sunday, liable to see some snows in parts of western Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, down into West Virginia. And then that relaxes during the day on Sunday as the core of this high moves in. Actually, the coldest air is going to be overhead Sunday morning, and before it starts to moderate a bit. But then with the high moving to the coast, this is where you could have your next round of frosts Sunday night into Monday morning, much like what we're seeing now. And then out that goes, and here's on Monday night, you got another front with another high coming down. This one not quite with the same push as the one for Sunday night into Monday morning, but that flow from Canada continues to dominate. And there is a high of size that is going to move into New England. And then here comes the next weather system for Saturday and Sunday. So this is the weekend of the 27th and 28th that we're talking about. Now, I'm going to stop it here at this point because I want to go to the teleconnection indices, and then we're going to come back to the upper air and some of the other model runs to give you an idea of where we're going with all this. So when we look at the teleconnections, and for those of you who are new to this, if you're on my channel for the first time, or maybe you've seen this before, but you're still not 100% sure, each one of these indices measures temperature changes in different geographic areas. The Pacific North America Index is actually a combination. Much of the index is derived by calculating pressure changes in the East Pacific, but also there is an element of the pressure changes off the southeast coast of the United States that play into this. So basically, when you have a strong PNA, Pacific North America Index, a strongly positive PNA index, it's telling you that there's a ridge in the west and a trough in the east. The bigger the readings are, that's usually in combination of the ridge being in the west with the trough in the east. But as the PNA weakens a bit, it could be that you have a weaker ridge in the west and still have some troughing in the east, or you could have a strong ridge in the west, but in the east, at least at the time, for a given period of time, the trough is kind of on the flat side. So there's a number of ways of interpreting this, but if you want the idea of a pattern that was going to be a bit more on the stormy side for the eastern part of the United States, a positive PNA is something you would normally see. It's not the only way, however, because much of last winter we spent with extremely negative PNA index readings. And bear in mind that anytime you see any of these indices stretched out to an extreme, there's something out of whack in a big way in the atmosphere, so you could wind up with strange things happening. In fact, I think back to the four nor'easters. Actually, I believe the PNA index was off the charts negative during all of that. So there are other ways. And one of the other indices that might be another way is the North Atlantic Oscillation, or what we often refer to as the Greenland block. Now, one of the things that's important here to look at is the fact that we're strongly positive on this index for another couple of days, but then it goes negative, and it goes negative in a hurry. And this is at the point that we see it going negative here, which is going to be on Sunday, comes right after that cold front comes through. What that is signaling is, by going negative through all of next week, is a growing blocky pattern across the North Atlantic, and that's going to be a player, I believe, with regards to whatever happens later next week. That blocky signal, I believe, is very important to the equation. The other thing to watch too, which is, I think, a really good signal to use when it comes to cold weather, especially in the wintertime, is the EPO Index. The cold weather lovers, you want to see that EPO Index on the negative side, which it does get to, but not in a big way. You try to, you look for strong signals in one direction or another. This look of the EPO is, it's slightly, it goes from being negative to slightly negative to neutral to slightly positive, back to neutral and to slightly negative. So it does, that plus the fact that being that where we are on the calendar of as of October 18th, I don't think it's too important, because we're not really dealing with cold air here and with any kind of snow issue. Now, if this were, say, a month, if we were talking the latter part of November and particularly getting into the month of December, then the EPO might have a bit more input in terms of the overall forecast. But I don't really think we're worried about precipitation type here with respect to the upcoming event. Now, what's happening in the upper air? All right, so let's bring that up, and we'll start with the present time. And of course, actually, this is today, where we have this trough lifting out in the east. So we do actually have a bit of a ridge that builds in the east, but notice it doesn't build very strongly. It's just a rather weak ridge. It's enough to warm temperatures back up to near average and a little bit above average on Saturday. The warm-ups in between these air masses very much what I would describe as being subpar. If you were to have the ridge really fly up in between troughs, then you would be talking about warm-ups that would be significant. But to get temperatures back to near or maybe slightly above average for a whole day, to me, does not constitute a big warm-up, and certainly nothing resembling a blowtorch. And then, of course, the next trough swings right into play. Now, while this is going on, keep your eyes on the North Atlantic, south of Greenland, because this is where we're going to see the beginnings of a strong high that builds in the upper atmosphere early next week. And while it initially pulls out to the east, another ridge comes in to replace it and builds up toward Greenland toward the end of next week. And this is where, now I'll roll it back. So you'll watch it one more time as that big upper high builds, and then it pulls eastward, and then another upper high comes right in its place in toward Greenland and Iceland. So this is the blocky signature. It's not a strong blocking signature, but it's strong enough. And now watch the next trough as it comes into the west. Temporarily, the ridge in the west disappears, but then you've got this trough that dives down into the plains and into the lower Gulf states, and the ridge then pops right back up inland of the west coast. So this is setting up for the potential for some storminess in the east. Always remember that you could have all these signals in the world in your favor. If the trough position is not in the right place, then you're going to wind up with a track much further. Well, if the trough is too far to the west, you're going to wind up with a low that's going to be along the Appalachians or west of the Appalachians. If the trough position is further east, if it's along or just to the left of 80, then you could be wind up with a storm moving up the east coast. In the late afternoon run of the models, and there are two short waves at play here. There's one in the northern stream here that's coming down in southwest Canada and then moves into the northern plains, and then the bottom of the trough, the energy that comes into the Pacific Northwest, drops down into the southern plains. And on this run of the GFS, you have a bit more of a phased look to it. And as a result, you're going to wind up, at least on this run, to take a system to our west. Again, this is for late next week. We're jumping way ahead of the game here, because there really isn't too much that's happening between now and then. If we look at the prior run, it's a little bit different in the prior run. Same blocky scenario in the Atlantic, so that part is constant. The difference is that in this run, if you look closely, there is an indentation in the flow here from Nebraska down into Texas, and this is for next Thursday, while energy is coming into the northwest. So you do have some shortwave trough that kind of pushes well ahead on the prior run. So as a result, your trough position here is less phased, okay, less phased, and much further to the east. And you can see that it actually, how this upper feature just kind of cuts off and spins away on its own as it moves up right along the coast. So this is the big issue here. Resolving the upper air and the timing of all these different short waves. Obviously, on some runs, the timing is such as where the systems wind up getting phased and phased late and to the west. In other runs, they're more separate and stay less phased, but are still pretty energetic as they lift up to the northeast and northward. So I can tell you this: tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday, we're still going to be debating, and maybe even into Monday and Tuesday of next week, we're still going to be debating the final outcome. But the keys to all of this are going to be these various shortwave troughs and how they time out and when they come together. I'll just show you by comparison. We can pull up the surface map here. I'll get really tight so we can see the differences. This was from the day run today of the GFS, which with its kind of initially flatter look with that first shortwave running out well ahead, you have a surface low that kind of straddles along the Gulf Coast and then lifts up to the Carolinas. And see, this is where it gets a little squirrely because it just kind of hangs there, waits for the energy in the west to pick it up, and you wind up with a fairly wrapped up gale over Chesapeake Bay before it gets kicked out to the east. See, this is where you start to get squirrely with what the models do, where it takes something like this and then moves it to the east. And of course, you've got the usual suspects on social media and on the internet proclaiming all sorts of nonsense with respect to Sandy comparisons and everything else. They're not appropriate. Okay, so let's just make that clear. They're particularly not appropriate since you really don't have anything from that standpoint to talk about yet. I think it's just, I don't even know why I don't even want to bring it up myself just to call attention to it, but I get so annoyed with it. If it winds up being a problem, we've got plenty of time to watch it, and thanks to everybody jumping on board with this stuff 2.5 weeks ahead of time, it should be no shock to anyone. And whenever I'm getting messages about it, I already know that it's out of control. So I'm just trying to bring this back, pull this all back a little bit, and have some common sense with regards to what's happening here. Now that was the day run, by the way. That was the day run from earlier. Here's the European. Okay, so let me just finish this off with the day run, and I'll run the sequence by you again. So it almost seems like it doesn't know what to do with this surface low, a distinctly non-tropical one, and then takes it out to the east and then just kicks it up into the Gulf of Maine and then eventually over to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and then we've got another system behind that. So again, this was the run from earlier today. The late afternoon run, however, because of the fact that it's got everything phased so far to the left, you wind up with one low with the second shortwave that's in western Kentucky and Tennessee. The lead coastal low is out here inland of the Carolinas, and there's actually probably another surface low sitting somewhere east of Hatteras. And then that just kind of lifts up. You've got a primary low into Ohio. There's probably a low over Chesapeake Bay in here, even though the model doesn't print it out, but there's an occluded front, and what we call the point of occlusion, where the cold front, the warm front, and the occluded front meet. There's probably a low at that triple point, and that's what this run is doing. And then that just marches northward with a wrapped up deep animal there over Lake Superior before it goes away up to the north and east. The European was also interesting in its own right. The European having issues with regards to the same thing, phase or no phase, and it had a bit of a flatter look to it initially, at least, although it still winds up with a fairly wrapped up surface low by the time we get to next Sunday, sitting well east of Virginia, south of Cape Cod. From a rain standpoint, the European really didn't do very much with this across the Northeast. It did bring some significant rains for the mid-Atlantic states and points westward into the Ohio Valley, but it kind of slides everything out further to the east. The problem is the upper air, and here's the Europeans' viewpoint. And in fact, it's probably better if I go a little wider with this. Same idea. The block builds on you can see it there, that upper high that builds out north of the Azores, pulls out, and then the next high builds into Greenland, Iceland. It's remarkable how all three models have that signature through the next 7 or 8 days. Sometimes when you get these blocky patterns, you have the models going into complete disagreement over the ridges and troughs out in the Atlantic, and whether the block is real or is not real. We saw that happen a lot of times last winter, but here we have an instance where the models seem to be on course and fairly close. The problem with the European is again short waves and timing, where it rushes out something into the southern plains well ahead of that northern stream energy, and it kind of keeps it separate here, with the southern stream energy lifting up well ahead of the shortwave trough that's going to dive into the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley. So that's the Europeans' problem, and it really kind of illustrates here the vast scope of things. And here we are on Thursday the 18th, and we're talking about 8 days, 8, 9, and 10 in the long range. We're in no position to make a call on this here at all. I think the keys obviously are going to lie in the timing of these troughs as they move along, and whether the ridge in the west is allowed to pop back up once all that energy translates eastward. And I don't yet know which model has the right feel for this. It's very tough when you get into the first system or two of the season, of a new season. Obviously, since it's very easy to forecast weather when you've got a ridge in the east for 7 days, okay? Because your primary concern is going to be, okay, when does it break down? Here, we're in a brand new pattern, a pattern that is potentially rather dynamic, and it's the first time since probably last April that or early May that we've seen something like this. So I don't know how the models are going to handle it, or which models got the better handle on this. We've also just come through a period where some models have outperformed versus other models. At times the European has done well, at times the GFS has done well, and every once in a while the Canadian throws a solid strike over home plate. So right now, for those of you who are young forecasters, Ryan, I'm thinking you're on board tonight. This is where you just kind of absorb it all. This is the point where the most important thing is to get a flavor for what's happening in the upper atmosphere. So with respect to rainfall, because I want to honor Johnny Quest, Poor guy is, you know, after the rain that you've had this season, I'm sure you're still kind of shell-shocked with what's being forecast. And at least from the standpoint of the GFS, over the next 10 days, your rainfall amounts are 2 inches or less. You can see where the heavy rains are being indicated on the GFS model along the Texas coast. Also, some areas in central Texas still picking up another 2 to 4 inches of rain in some places. This is, again, the model showing this, but all of this being spread out over the next 10 days. The bulk of this, the vast majority of the rain that you're seeing here, by the way, is when that system comes later next week. Because if I take that away and just go through this weekend through Sunday, you could see that the rain up and down the East Coast and pretty much everywhere east of the Mississippi is a non-event. And snowfall, by the way, with this next shot of cold air, is popping up. We're seeing some areas of snow. This is all some lake effect stuff. It's minor. It's October 18th. I would expect it to be minor, so that makes total sense. And, by the way, since we are certainly interested in this with regards to snow cover growth over North America, at least when we look at the GFS over the next 10 days, we are continuing to see ample snow cover growth across North America, particularly central and eastern Canada, and also northwest Canada back to Alaska. Alaska, you know, a number of people have posted about the fact that Fairbanks, Anchorage have yet to see their first snowflakes. Well, it looks like they're going to play some catch-up here over the next 10 days if the GFS is right, and we're still seeing snow growth in Canada running at a record pace. We are also going to be, you know, watching for Dr. Judah Cohen's forecast. I thought he said he was going to have it out on the 18th. I haven't had a chance to check his website, his blog, to see if he did post it, but we do. Well, I do want to look at Asian snow, the Siberian snow cover growth over the next 10 days, because that has been subpar. It does pick up a bit here as we move toward the last 10 days of the month. This takes us to October 28th. I'm thinking that it's not going to be enough to bring that index up. Maybe up to more toward the mid-range than where it is now, which is sitting on the lower end, while the Canadian snow cover growth as of mid-month was at a record pace. Chris Eddy, I actually do follow Dr. Cohen. I can actually check his Twitter in a second. I will do that. I know he was talking about the polar vortex in the stratosphere getting a circular tight look to it, which would argue that we might see the pattern flip later in November and early December and turn warm again. But I happened to notice the last couple of runs of the GFS that sort of circular tight look is not quite there anymore. So it may have backed off on that. You got to be careful with the models with trying to look at things through the eyes of one or two runs. Sometimes it does that. It'll hiccup and then it'll go back to whatever the primary pattern was. So I would wait for some more confirmation. Although, don't get me wrong, he's the expert on the stratosphere. I'm not at all, and I'll defer to him. I'm just pointing out what the last couple of runs have shown. Let me come back up to you guys here on the board. I'm trying to read your chat stuff at the same time, so I'm going to bring myself up full screen. I'll pull up Twitter. I'll pull up his Twitter account and see if he's posted anything here. So let's see. Hello. Okay. My screen is acting a little slowly here. All right. It's just taking, when I've got the broadcast program on, it kind of slows everything down a little bit. And oh boy, there we go. So let's see. Okay, he has posted his forecast. So what I'm going to do is I will put the link up. Now just bear in mind, I'll put the link up on the chat board so you can pull it down and read it a bit later. Here we go, and that is his link to his blog, and we're going to try and get him back on, by the way, to explain all this in what he's seeing. All right, so let me I'm going to scan it really fast here. Okay. The Arctic oscillation is forecast to remain positive this week and then trend negative next week and possibly into negative territory toward the end of the month. So when you have a negative Arctic oscillation, by the way, that is usually for the eastern part of the United States, that is a cold signal. I'm just reading this really quick because he covers a lot. Asia, positive, okay. Above normal temperatures across much of Asia and the Middle East. I'm trying to see if he just mentions any of this with respect to snow cover growth. Yeah, he's got so much on here. I'm scanning down. He's got talking about the European blocking. He does address, by the way. He is addressing. You may have heard, the European models, the European long-range models have shown a really cold, aggressive winter for the eastern part of the United States. He admits that he's not sure what is causing the European to do this, but I'm just looking at what he's got, and it sounds like he's being a bit skeptical here about the idea of a colder winter, but I'm just reading this very fast. Okay, this results in a pattern that can be described as a blowtorch across the mid-latitudes, a term I am sure we will hear often this winter. I'm skeptical of the cold Arctic and lack of high-latitude blocking, given that sea ice is likely to be once again near record lows this winter, but is consistent with most modeling studies that low sea ice does not impact mid-latitude winter, or at least it doesn't force colder weather at mid-latitudes. Okay, he seems to be fascinated about this European. He says so. I'm fascinated with the Europeans' winter forecast, and he goes into it. He is forecasting. He's actually forecasting warmer than average temperatures in the east. So I guess he's going with whatever he has now with respect to the lack of snow cover growth in Siberia and the other things he sees that's going on. So he's going against the European long range. I gotta. To be fair, I have to really read through everything he's got because it's a long read and it's hard for me to just scan through it. I'm just looking at your chat. So Israel, you're asking me about WhatsApp, a WhatsApp chat, and making you an admin of it. I'm very skeptical of WhatsApp, if only because of the security breach that they had. So I'll have to look into that when I've got some time. Right now, I'm inclined not to do it because I'm not a big fan of WhatsApp, and I'm highly critical of what Facebook has done with respect to the issues that I've had. Mirtha Gunter, can I go over what's happening to the Gulf Stream again? Could not see all of the map on your library chat last night. Yeah, we're still watching the whole situation with respect to the idea of the Gulf Stream breaking down out in the Atlantic. It's something that has been brought up by a number of people, and it is being studied and looked at. It looks as if, it does look as if when you get about halfway across the Atlantic that it just kind of peters out, and it becomes very difficult to find on the actual maps. the implication of such a breakdown is possible that we may have seen this in the last several winters, where the winter winds up getting extended a bit into March and April, and then we get to that phenomena where basically the switch just gets flipped and we go right into summer. We've also been getting it where we've seen the extension of summer well into the fall months, and we saw what happened last year, that we had to wait almost to the latter part of November for the switch to be flipped, and it was in a big way. This year, it seems to be playing a bit differently in that we've gotten to this colder than normal pattern pretty early. And I would caution everybody that, again, just because we've got this now doesn't mean that it can't flip again. This is not, to me, giving me a signal of how the whole winter is going to be. It's interesting that we have this now, but I'm not at all sold on the fact that this means that we're going to be locked into this much beyond the beginning part of November. We'll see. Again, my approach is different from others. I try not to figure things out much beyond the second week of the long range, and I'll let the long range people handle that. So they got their heads around it. I do not. Warmer ocean water temperatures, Ryan Ford, can cause winter storms to intensify more rapidly. The only thing I would say to you, though, is that that warm water part of the equation is built into the weather models. The weather models know that the ocean water temperatures are warmer than average, and they usually have a pretty good handle on it. So I don't think you'll see big errors in weather models, say, missing storms intensifying. It'll be baked into its cake for the most part. The cause of the breakdown is unclear, Jason. Yeah, that's something that they are, they're actually currently studying. Now they were able to, have sensors where they can actually put sensors out there in the ocean and relay data back for the first time, so we can actually see what's happening to the Gulf Stream and to the ocean and the temperature profile out there, to figure out just what exactly is going on. I'm just trying to run back through all your questions. What do I look at to see maps of what's going on in the stratosphere? Jason, on Tropical Tidbits, you're going to go to only the GFS has the 10 millibar map, and it's only, you got to pick the region where you see the entire northern hemisphere, the whole northern hemisphere on both sides, okay? And then you go to the upper dynamics, and you'll see the stratosphere on there out to 16 days. I will send you a link directly as soon as I'm done, okay? Brian Patterson, watching that. Well, we're watching how it evolves in the east. That's where we're at this point. We're not going to make any proclamations right now as to what's this going to how this is going to wind up. And Timothy Veltman, thank you. Yeah, Shelly, man, West Pacific WPO is the West Pacific Oscillation, which looks at the pressure changes out in the West Pacific. I don't know too much about the WPO and its impact on all of these. You could. I'm going to tell you right now, if you try to look at every single thing that's out there at every single index, you'd never be able to make a forecast because you wouldn't have time. So I try to limit what I look at. I know what tools I like. I look at those, and then that's what I stick with, because I understand what they do and I know how they work. And when I start trying to look at all these other different things, all it winds up doing is making me very confused, and it makes my job a bit harder. So I'm just gonna, there's no time for it. Okay, I'd rather just kind of work with the models that I understand. Asante Stevens, what is the probability of a major snowstorm like Sandy in 2012 happening this year? Okay, unless you're in the mountains of West Virginia, which did get some heavy snows out of the post-tropical storm Sandy that came inland. I guess if that's what you're referring to, I don't see anything right now that would point to that. at this moment, but I wouldn't be in a position to do that, nor would you have been in this position 10 days before Hurricane Sandy to point out that whether there was going to be a big snow out of it. That's a shorter range issue. You got to get inside 4 and 5 days to figure that part out of it. Right now, you know, I'm not seeing anything that would point in that direction. Resident statistician Anthony Orr points out that on this date in 1950, Hurricane King made landfall near Miami, Florida, the latest calendar year continental U.S. Category 4 landfalling hurricane on record. 3 fatalities in Florida. Awesome. That's the latest Category 4. Okay. See, we're going downhill now. Right now, the tropics are pretty quiet. They've shut down in the Atlantic, and if they stay shut down, it's probably an indicator that you know, winter will have an early onset. But we've got a ways yet to go here. Still haven't ruled out the possibility that there could be one or two more named systems somewhere. Is it possible that weather models, ask Aunt Ryan Ford, trend cold to such a degree that places such as northern New Jersey get their first accumulating snow next week? I doubt it, Ryan. Not at the moment. I don't really see it. The connection up into Canada does get a little bit weaker later next week, so you're not really getting a super duper cold shot. Bear in mind, again, we're at October 18th here, so if you're going to get snow in the Northeast this time of year, it's more than likely going to be out of a very, very deep upper low, and not from cold air coming down, not setting it up in the way that winter storms are set up in December, January, and February, and sometimes in late November. It's more than likely would be driven by a very, very cold upper air storm system with some kind of very, very deep surface low someplace. I'm sorry to be vague about it in terms of, you know, naming spots, but it's just a little bit different this time during this time of year. In the wintertime, you've got, you know, big cold air masses that come down. You're dealing with genuine cold air. I mean, this is the leading edge, the beginning of the season stuff that we're seeing. And I mean, frankly, it's cold and below normal by a large margin, but it's by no means comparable to air masses that you might see as you get into late November and December. Ocean water temperatures on Long Island hinder snowfall. When you have a wind that comes in that's more say 05, 06, in the early part of the winter, it's you know, a northeast wind is going to be problematic, but then as you get deeper into January and February, you tend to be able to hold on to snow with respect to the wind direction, unless it's really more east northeast or east, and then you've got a big problem. All right, you know what? I'm going to put an end to it here. Let me just one more time just let you know we've got the Patreon platform, and we're going to have more coverage of any weather that's going on, and you get exclusive posts. I'll probably get to a Patreon video tomorrow morning. I was too tired this morning because of my library appearance yesterday at the Springfield Library in Springfield, New Jersey. So for those of you who are interested, you can consider the Patreon platform. It is a subscription platform. It's just $2 a month, and it's a great way for those of you who would like to, you know, support my channel and support what I'm doing. It gets me a few extra cigars every month, and that keeps me happy. So there's the link to it. And by the way, there's you can message me at any time on the Patreon platform, and I will respond. So the link is there for you on the chat, and thank you very much for those of you who have joined. Also, by the way, you can also support my channel if you shop on Amazon. There's an Amazon link on the descriptor to this live stream and in the descriptor to this video. If you're watching it on the replay, we are a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon and its affiliated sites. So if you shop on Amazon, you get your stuff, and Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin out of their pocket, which also lets me get a couple of cigars every once in a while. And thank you for those of you who have used it. But if you're a weather geek with the winter coming up, and you don't want to deal with flat earthers and geoengineers and all the rest of it, and you want to be on a place where you can just kind of ask the questions and say what you'd like to say without any kind of, feeling like am I asking a silly question? You'll never get that. Take a look at the Patreon platform and consider signing up. By the way, some news on my app. It's done. It's been finished. It now lies in the hands of Google and Apple, and we wait for their approvals. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks, we will have it done and out there, and Patreon members will get it first. So you guys will get to beta test it. So you guys will get it first, and I'm thinking that Android, because Google tends to be a lot faster than Apple when it comes to the approval process. So Android users will likely get first run at this, but hopefully we'll get it on the on iTunes and on the Apple Store, and you iPhone holders will be able to help me with beta testing it. It's if you're in the New York, New Jersey, Long Island, Hudson Valley, Western Connecticut area, the local forecasts that are going to be on that app are going to be focused for that area. So they won't match up if you're obviously if you're outside that area. The local forecast end of it is not going to match up because I'm going to be doing the forecasting on the app. It's not going to be model generated. It's going to be Joe generated. I'm going to do it. It's going to be my input, and that's going to make it different from other apps. But you're going to have to be in that geographic area for that forecast to have any kind of value. On the other hand, you will also get latest website posts about the long range and links to the latest videos in case you missed the live streams. You can watch it there off the app. So you'll see it when it comes out, hopefully in the next 2 weeks. William Huber, yes, the Joe and Joe Weather Show, my colleague Joe Rayo is going to be with me tonight on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, and Patreon members, you'll get the upload, the link to the upload as soon as I can get it done. So that'll come up a little later on this evening, and then it'll be on the YouTube library later tonight. All right, folks, have a great evening. Thanks again for your patience about yesterday with regards to the chat and not being able to get the questions through. And we'll see you tomorrow.